Hello guys, it is Tuesday. Let's do, well actually for you it would be Wednesday because I'm filming a day earlier. So we are ready for chapter 10. So we learned that when Jonah was at this Mr. Reardon's office, he was getting all this information and he literally felt sick. So he ran to the restroom to be sick. So that was a long chapter. Okay, so we're on chapter 10. Jonah spun around, or spun as well as anyone could, 3 seconds after vomiting. A man in a gray maintenance staff sweatshirt stood leaning against the tile wall, but it wasn't the same janitor who'd given him the Mountain Dew. That guy had been older. This guy was young and didn't really look like a janitor somehow. We've had to do way too much planning on the fly here. We just thought 20 ounces of Mountain Dew. At some point, you'd have to leave the office and go to the bathroom, the man said. So, we could get you a loan. Ooh, so they wanted him to get a loan. Jonah realized he was practically trapped in the bathroom stall. To get out, he'd have to walk right past the man. Hadn't this day already been horrifying enough? He darted a quick glance down. Maybe if he dived fast enough, he could roll out from under the wall of the stall and make it to the door out into the hallway before the man saw what he was doing. The man caught Jonah's glance. "It's not like that," the man said, holding up his hands innocently. "I just wanted to tell you something." "What?" Jonah said, cautiously. Maybe he could swing the stall door into the man's face. Maybe he could jump on the toilet and hang on to the stall's wall to get leverage to kick him. Maybe. "When you go back to Mr. Reardon's office," the man said quickly, like he thought he might run out of time, "find a way to look in the file of papers on his desk. Memorize all the names you can." "There isn't a file on Mr. Reardon's desk," Jonah said. "Just a laptop." He was sure of that. He could close his eyes and picture the vast expanse of that desk, almost completely empty. There will be when you get back," the man said. The man took a step toward Jonah, and Jonah tensed, but the man kept going, around the corner of the stall toward the door, out into the hallway. Jonah didn't hear the door open and close, but when he peeked out, the man was gone. Jonah collapsed against the metal stall again. He took a deep breath. Steady. He found himself, he was clearing his head, enough to remember to flush the toilet. A pounding noise came from the hallway, somebody pounding on the door. "Jonah, Jonah, are you all right in there?" It was Mom, treating him like a kindergartner again. "I'm fine," he yelled out. "Do you need any help?" "No, just give me a minute." He went to the sink, splashed water on his face, scooped up water in his mouth, and swallowed. His mouth still tasted gross. He leaned his forehead against the mirror. Papers, he thought. Look into the file on Mr. Reardon's desk. "Jonah," Mom called from the other side of the bathroom door. "Coming!" He wiped his face on his sleeve. Okay, not good manners, but it was the best he could do under the circumstances, and he left the bathroom. Mom was waiting right outside the door. Dad and Mr. Reardon were a little farther down the hall. "Are you?" Mom started to ask, but Jonah cut her off. "I told you I'm okay. Let's just get this over with." Mr. Reardon watched coldly as Mom and Jonah went back to his office. "Really?" he said. "I believe we're done here." No, please. Jonah's fine now," Mom said. "We still need to talk this out. I think we just got off on the wrong foot." Getting off on the wrong foot was a Mom catchphrase. That was what she said about Jonah and Billy Barton in 2nd grade when Jonah came home with a black eye. Jonah had completely misunderstood. "No, Mom," he'd insisted. "It was his right fist, not his foot at all." Mr. Reardon looked doubtful, but they all settled back into their chairs near Catherine, who had evidently never bothered getting up. Jonah shot her a resentful glance, but she looked even worse than he felt. She was deathly pale, and her eyes were huge and round, as if she'd just been terrified out of her wits. Wow, Jonah thought. I've never known Catherine to be that concerned about me getting sick. "I'm fine," he half whispered and half mouthed to her. But her eyes stayed huge. Her skin stayed pale. Mr. Reardon and Jonah's parents were still talking, but Jonah tuned it out for a moment, pretending he was just, maybe trying to see if Mr. Reardon's laptop was a Mac or a PC. He glanced toward Mr. Reardon's desk. There was a file there now. It was one of those thin, cheap, neutral-colored folders people used in offices. But at the same time, Jonah looked at the folder. Mr. Reardon did too. Jonah was sure he did, even though he didn't move his head at all. His voice didn't waver. In fact, Jonah started watching Mr. Reardon now. Mr. Reardon kept glancing at the files every few seconds. It reminded Jonah of the time that he'd broken a window playing baseball, and that he thought if he just didn't mention it, maybe Mom and Dad wouldn't notice. But when Dad came out into the backyard, no matter how hard Jonah tried, he couldn't keep from looking toward that broken window. It was like the window was a magnet with an irresistible pull on his eyes. The file seemed to have the same pull for Mr. Reardon. Of course, Jonah had been only 6 years old then, and Mr. Reardon was a grown-up. But the more Jonah ignored what Mr. Reardon was saying, something about the greater good of the entire nation and compromises made by all Americans for the sake of security, and the more he just paid attention to that small twitches of Mr. Reardon's eyes, the more Jonah was sure of 3 things. Number 1, Mr. Reardon was surprised and upset. No, make that furious to see a file on his desk. Number 2, Mr. Reardon really didn't want Jonah's family to notice that file on his desk. Number 3, there was no way Jonah would be able to casually lean forward and open the file, then look at and memorize its contents, not when Mr. Reardon was already alternating his nervous glances at the file with nervous glances at Jonah. Because I was sick, because this whole meeting's about me, or because he already saw me looking at the file. Really, Mr. Reardon was saying, I believe we've already covered this. I see no reason to continue this discussion. Oh no! Mr. Reardon was about to end the conversation and kick them out of his office. Jonah panicked. Should he fake another stomach problem? No, Mom and Dad would focus all their attention on him, and it'd just give him, Mr. Reardon, the perfect opportunity to hide the file. What then? Jonah glanced around frantically at the ceiling, the floor, the windows behind Mr. Reardon's desk. He glanced back at the floor a second time, at Catherine's red striped shoelaces, flapping out loose and dangling beside of the leg of the chair. Windows, shoelaces. Jonah pitched forward. Hey, Catherine, he said loudly, your shoelaces are untied. For a moment, Jonah was afraid that she wasn't going to react. Why was she acting so freaky? But then she did lean forward, at least so that their heads were below the level of the desk out of sight. Then Jonah could whisper directly into her ear. I'm going to distract Mr. Reardon. Look inside that file on his desk. Memorize as much of it as you can. Catherine nodded, or at least Jonah thought she did. He didn't really have time to make sure. He straightened up. Well, Mom was saying, starting to stand up, we do appreciate you meeting with us like this, like I said before, but... What's that? Jonah interrupted, pointing out the window. He sincerely hoped Mr. Reardon had never been a middle school teacher, because if he had, he'd never fall for this. But Jonah tried not to think about that. He made his voice sound innocent and stunned. Was that like a ball of flame? He jumped up and dashed behind Mr. Reardon's desk. This was the risky part. He spun Mr. Reardon's chair around to face it toward the window. Catherine, now, he thought. But he couldn't glance back to make sure she was following instructions. He had to think about his own part. Look, Mr. Reardon, he cried, can you? He tried to act as though a horrifying thought had just occurred to him. Can you see the airport from here? Mr. Reardon did stand up and peer out the window. It was getting dark outside and the glass was tinted. The only thing Jonah could really see was the parking lot lights. But Jonah hoped it took Mr. Reardon a long time to figure that out. Mom and Dad were clustered by the window, too. We are awfully close to the airport, Mom murmured. Oh, those poor people. Thanks, Mom. Nice touch. I don't see anything, Mr. Reardon said. Was there a flicker of suspicion in his voice? Maybe we're at the wrong angle, Jonah said. He crouched down a little more, pointed over to the right, I think. There's nothing out there, Mr. Reardon said, and he sounded certain now. Wow, that's weird, Jonah said. Are you sure? From where I was sitting, it looked like... He shouldn't have said that. Where I was sitting, Mom and Dad and Mr. Reardon all turned around looking toward Jonah's chair. Fortunately, Catherine wasn't poring over the folder at that moment. She was leaning against the edge of the desk closest to the window, her arms behind her, her gaze fixed straight ahead, as if she too were engrossed in searching for Jonah's mysterious light. But how could she possibly have had enough time to look in the folder, memorize whatever was in there, and then position herself in front of the desk? Jonah's heart sank. His big act had been for nothing. I guess it must have just been a reflection, he said. Some of the disappointment had just crept into his voice, making it sound like he'd really been hoping to see a dramatic plane crash because Mom said, a little disapprovingly, "Thank goodness that's all it was." Then Mr. Reardon was showing them out, down the hallway, through the waiting area, out into the parking lot. Jonah didn't see a single other janitor, with or without Mountain Dew. With or without Mountain Dew. Jonah held Catherine back as they approached the car, as soon as they were out of Mr. Reardon's view. "Did you get to see any of those papers?" he said. "Not really," she admitted. "Thanks a lot," Jonah said bitterly. He knew it wasn't really fair to be mad at her. She hadn't had any time. Still, I did better than that." Catherine held up her cell phone. "I got pictures!" So she snapped a picture of the information that was in the folder. So now we get to think about what information was in the folder. I like Haddix Found. All right, stay tuned for tomorrow.